The history of what I caught my wife doing is this: my wife and I have been married for 7 years now, been together for 10 years. She works as an assistant manager at a fast food restaurant, while I work at a big tech firm. We met through her cousin when they were both in high school together, who introduced us to each other. She was dating another guy at the time, but they broke up shortly after she met me, being shy back then. It took some time before she began to trust me enough so that we could date each other. We only dated for about 3 months before our relationship progressed into a full relationship. That's until she graduated. She left to go back to school for a course. When she had the time, she would come down to see me during her breaks and holidays. Back then, I lived with my parents until we got married 2 years later. The marriage went well until about 3 years ago, when both of us got caught up at work with long hours. It really took a toll on our relationship, knowing that we hardly had any quality time together like before. Well, as the days go by, we really try to make time for one another, trying to do date nights or whatever, but I started to notice she was a tad bit distant, not as affectionate, and on her phone a lot. So I started to pay more attention to how she was interacting with her phone. I noticed she was texting a lot. I mean, every time we were together, she was sending a text to someone. While we were dating, she really didn't text much now. It seems she is doing it all the time. I caught her last night. She was in the shower, and I caught a glimpse of a text that really caught my attention when she got out of the shower. Well, let's just say I kept asking her questions about what's going on. She broke down and confessed it all to me. She said he was an old friend from high school who recently moved back into town. They have been talking since they were teenagers, but nothing ever happened between them until now. Keep in mind, this is just the first guy she was talking to. Remember, she was talking to 5 guys. He was just the first one I caught her chatting with. So I flat out told her I won't stay married to her. If she wants to talk to other men, I told her it's disrespectful and I won't stand for it. Well, she apologized and said she would stop talking to him. I told her, you need to tell him that you're a married woman and she shouldn't be talking to him. Well, another 2 weeks go by, and guess what? I caught her talking to another guy. I couldn't believe it. She told me to my face she wouldn't do it again. And here she is doing it again and talking to another guy. I was livid. I told her if it was me doing that, she probably would have divorced me. She claimed she wouldn't, but would wonder why I was talking to other women. I flat out asked her, where did you meet these men? She hesitated. I told her to answer me. She said Tinder. I said Tinder, really? After she said that, I walked away from her and went into the living room. She followed me screaming, I am sorry. I am sorry. I told her that we probably need to separate. She started crying. Please don't say that. I told her, you flat out lied to me. I asked you to please stop talking to this guy, and you end up talking to another guy. We go back and forth. At this point, my initial thought process was to contact an attorney to see what my options were. I slept on the couch. She would come in the living room a couple of times to get me to come to bed, but I declined. The next morning, I got up, showered, and went to work. I did not say anything to my wife. After work, I went straight to an attorney's office. This is when he told me that the best thing for me to do is give my wife a choice of whether she wants our marriage. The attorney made it very clear beforehand that divorces are never simple. They are messy, and there is no way around getting ugly for both parties involved. When he brought up mediation, though, everything seemed like it would be okay. After that point, he said, mediation seems to work for some divorce cases, not all the time though, and he also said that her talking to other men is usually not strong enough to grant the divorce. You will need to provide proof of an affair. I asked him, what about irreconcilable differences? He said when someone files for divorce based on irreconcilable differences, they are filing for a no-fault divorce, meaning neither spouse seeks to prove a wrongdoing that caused the end of the marriage. That's different than your situation. He says, if you want to divorce her based on her cheating on you, you will need to get proof, and that will also help your case, and also probably stop her from trying to get spousal support from you. I thanked the attorney for his advice and the free consultation he gave. After leaving the attorney's office, I head home and noticed that my wife has texted me a few times asking where I am. I sent her a text back letting her know I was on my way home. I had to finish a project at work when I got home. She was all over me. It was surprising to see her act that way. It was fun, but in the back of my mind, I am thinking, what is she up to? After we had some fun, she apologizes for talking to the other guys, and she will do everything to regain my trust. She reiterated everything in the back of my mind. I am thinking, how long will this last? So as the weeks go by, I don't see her on her phone as much, and I thought maybe she was really trying to regain my trust and wanting to work on the marriage, until one day I got home earlier than she did. She sent me a text earlier in the day saying she was working late. So being the good husband that I am, I wanted to surprise her and make dinner. I am in the kitchen making her favorite dish when I went to throw a jar in the trash and noticed there was a ripped up phone box from Straight Talk It. Looks like she tried to hide it, or maybe she forgot to, but she didn't do a good job after that. I stopped making dinner and threw everything away while needless to say I was really upset this woman doesn't want to be married to me so I kept my cool and started to think what do I need to do next? I wasn't going to let her know that I knew she had another phone at about 11 p.m. My wife came home and I was on the couch. I had dozed off. I had to play it cool the next morning after getting to work. I decided to call a couple of private investigators and inquire about their services. At this point, I'm trying to find out as much as I can remember. She works at a fast food restaurant and she doesn't make anywhere near the amount of money I make, so I don't want to pay spousal support after work. I had a chance to talk to a private investigator in depth. I told him why I needed his services, and he told me what he could do, so we agreed to meet later in the week. But in the last week or so, my wife has called me a couple of times letting me know she would be working late, which was uncommon, but at this time, I didn't care. I had planned to hire the private investigator to see what she was up to. The next day, I meet with the private investigator, gave him a picture of her and what kind of car she drives, and where she works. The first day of his surveillance, he catches her kissing a guy at her job. Now this day, she told me she was working late, but she got off work 3 hours early and went to a hotel with this guy. Now mind you, this is guy number one. She came home and tried to be intimate with me. I declined, telling her I didn't feel well. So the next day she told me she was scheduled to work the 3 to 11 shift. That's the information I gave to the private investigator. My private investigator goes to her job and waits for her. That day, he sees her pull into the parking lot of her job, but she never got out of her car until a red Mustang pulls up beside her. She gets out and gets in this guy's car. He follows them to a hotel where they stay in there for 3 hours. They leave the hotel and go to a restaurant for about an hour and a half. They leave the restaurant and go back to the hotel until about 10:30 p.m. That's when they leave the hotel again, go back to her job. She gets out of the Mustang, walks over and kisses the driver, gets into her car, changes into her work clothes, and drives home. When my wife gets home, I pretend to be asleep. The next day, the private investigator says he will come to my job and give me the footage. I was surprised at that because I didn't ask for the footage yet, but I agreed. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop nearby. When we meet, he shows me everything and even has an SD card for me to give to my attorney. I asked him why he was giving me the footage. He said he doesn't need to continue. He says your wife is cheating. That should be enough to get your divorce. He also showed me footage where she saw 3 other men, but she just met those men at her job. She kissed 2 of them. He says his wife of 22 years cheated on him, and he had to do the same thing. She was trying to take him to the cleaners, but he kept his cool, did his research, and didn't have to give her a dime. He advised me to get out of the house without her knowing I left, because once she finds out that you caught her, she might try to have you arrested for something stupid. He advises me to take the footage to my attorney and get this process started, but in the meantime, get out of the house. I didn't care about the house, it wasn't ours anyway, but we had planned on buying a house once the pandemic slowed, so I call a really good friend of mine who I have known since high school. I told him everything that's happened, even hiring the private investigator. He was shocked. I told him the private investigator advised me to get out of the house. He immediately said I can come crash at his place. I told him I need to move out as quickly as possible. He says, you know, I have a truck. He then says I can have you out of your place in a few hours while she is at work over the next few days. I discreetly packed some things without my wife knowing. We fooled around a few times, but she had no idea. I was planning to leave her that night. She sent me a text saying she was working late again. I called my friend and made a plan to move out that night. So after work, I go by my divorce attorney's office, drop off the footage, and told him to go ahead and file the divorce paperwork. So I rush home. My friend shows up about 20 minutes later, and we start packing my things. I only have clothes and my computer, laptop, and a TV that's in the garage. I plan to get a storage unit and store some of the things I am not readily using at the moment. At about 10 p.m. we finish and drive off. When we get up the street, I noticed that my wife just made a turn on our street. I thought to myself, perfect timing. 15 minutes later, my phone is ringing off the hook. I sent it to voicemail. She must have called about 20 times inside of 2 minutes. So the next day I wake up and check my phone. She sent 31 text messages and left 5 voicemails. I didn't respond to either one. When I get to work, my boss calls me in his office and asks what is going on because my wife has been calling and calling. I flat out told my boss my wife was cheating on me. I hired a private investigator to get my proof. I moved out of the house without her knowing it, and now I am divorcing her. He raises his eyebrows and says, wow. Okay. Then I told my boss, sorry for all of the phone calls. He says, don't worry about it. Just take care of what you need to. Well, as the day goes on, the phone calls at my job and my phone have become less and less. Then I get a strange phone call from my neighbor complaining that we are making too much noise at night after 10 p.m. I told my neighbor that I haven't been home in 3 days. She says, oh, I didn't know. I told her my wife and I are separated. She said she was sorry to hear that, and she noticed a couple of guys over the last couple of days going to her house after 10 p.m. I apologized to her for that, but there was nothing I could do. I wasn't going to contact my wife because I did not want it. 2 weeks goes by. My divorce attorney calls me and says that my wife has been served with divorce papers. I would imagine my phone would blow up that day, but it didn't. 3 weeks later, my divorce hearing is here. I got to the courthouse early. I drove my friend's truck. I didn't take my car. I wanted to see if she would show up, and yes, she did. She had a briefcase, which I thought was really surprising. Boy, she was in for a surprise. I get out of the truck, walk toward the courthouse, find out what courtroom we were in. Well, I walk into the courtroom. She turns around and glances at me and turns back around. I walk over to my table, and my attorney is already there. The judge comes out and asks, "Are we ready to proceed?" To make a long story short, she asked for spousal support and told the judge that I was mentally and physically abusive. But the most amazing part of her story, she couldn't provide proof that I was. Well, my attorney buried her. The judge showed her all the proof of her infidelity. She was shocked. He denied her request for spousal support. She tried to ask for $2,000 per month. The judge granted me the divorce. After that, I never saw her again. About 2 months after the divorce, her cousin, the one who introduced us way back when, said that she was getting evicted and already had her car repossessed. Well, I don't wish bad luck on anyone, but she brought that on herself. Thanks to everyone who saw through her when I didn't. I had to spend money to get confirmation. In the long run, I will save money by not